Saladin used to be considered one of the best investments for open field PvP in Rise of Kingdoms, but a ton has changed in season 2, especially since it was announced that Bertrand would be coming to season 2 as a combo commander with AoE damage. So the question becomes, is Saladin still worth getting in Rise of Kingdoms in 2025? In order to answer that question, I'm going to refresh you guys on his entire kit, his skills, talent builds, museum relic formations, and the pros and cons of Saladin. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. As you guys know, Saladin is a cavalry, conquering, and support tree commander, but how do you get your hands on him? Well, first, if you're a brand new player, you're not going to see him in the game until season 2. You can see that right at the top of the screen here. He shows up in season 2, and it's easier to get your hands on him now than ever because he is a Wheel of Fortune commander. They made that change at this point probably a couple of years ago, but he used to be a mightiest governor commander. Now he's on the wheel, and later down the line he's going to show up in the legendary chests, and he'll also show up in the daily special offer, which, by the way, guys, they did change this to be $3 now for all 3 of these chests. So you get everything here for $3, and Saladin is a commander that shows up here. Now let's go over the skills for Saladin so we know exactly what he's doing in the open field. His active skill has a 1000 rage requirement, and it says that you deal direct damage to a single target troop with a damage factor of 1400, and you reduce the target's march speed by 30% and its healing received by 40% for 5 seconds. So 2 components here: relatively weak single target damage factor. Now in the season of conquest, in the end game, this damage factor is abysmal. This is horrible. Okay, in season 2 it's a bit more acceptable because a lot of people are still using the season 1 legendaries, or maybe even some epic commanders. So in those kvks he's a little bit more usable. But the second thing here is a pretty long march speed debuff, which we'll try to talk about later in the video. I think that it is nice, but not that many people are investing in commanders for single target march speed reduction, especially because march speed reduction is pretty common these days. The second skill says this commander's cavalry units gain 20% attack, 20% defense, and 5% march speed. So here we see 40% of stats on a season 2 commander. That's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good. It's spread across 2 different stats. Unfortunately, there's no health here, but there is some tankiness, which leading up to Saladin in season 1, you don't really have any tanky cavalry commanders, right? You have Minamoto, you have Cao Cao, but both of those commanders, they just have attack, right? They just have cavalry attack. And in the case of Cao Cao, he actually lowers his own defense on the expertise, I believe. So all in all, you know, even though this is still some attack, at least there's some defense here. And the march speed, you know, I'd love it to be higher. We see more march speed on commanders like Minamoto, Cao Cao, but you know, he's caps, right? So he's probably going to be faster than everything in season 2 anyway. So that's really, really nice. The third skill is one of the things that made him shine for so long. It is called Bond of Fate. It says this commander's troop takes 30% less skill damage and 20% less counter attack damage. Now this is, I mean, back in the day, 30% skill damage reduction was really, really good because most of the damage that you were taking was skill damage, and that has not really aged super well. We'll talk about that later, but in season 2 this is actually still pretty good. I think you're still going to see a lot of players running around with Minamoto. You're going to see a lot of people using YSG, right? And so, you know, if you have people running Thutmose or whatever the case might be, Mehmed, there's a lot of commanders in season 1 and season 2 that do skill damage exclusively, and so still good for kvk2, questionable after that. And then finally, 20% less counterattack damage taken. That's really not much, right? It's really not much. You're not, I mean, unless you're getting swarmed down, you're not taking that much counterattack damage anyway. And even if you are getting swarmed down, your Saladin's going to be dead. Taking a look at the fourth skill, it says when attacking a city, this commander's troop deals 15% more damage to the city's garrison, but it cannot plunder the city's resources. So a very interesting mechanic here on the fourth skill, and it is unique to hitting a player city. This does not work obviously with hitting a flag, fortress, pass, or any other type of stronghold. It is exclusively for hitting player cities. So the real benefit for Saladin is that this fourth skill is actually not one that you ever really need, right? If you're an open field PvP player, you will never use this, right? And so, okay, that's pretty cool. And then let's look at the expertise. It actually bumps up the damage factor on the active skill. It says deals direct damage to the target troop with a damage factor of 1700, reduces the target's march speed by 50%, and healing received by 50% for 5 seconds. So we see a small bump in the damage factor and a bump in the debuff as well. This is one of the strongest march speed reductions in the game. However, again, it is only one target, and 1700 damage factor is still relatively low for a single target hit. Now, as far as talent trees go, this is really the only talent tree that I could sort of think of that would make any sense here in the game for open field PvP. Here we go ahead and grab 2 points into rejuvenate. Those of you that don't know, the third point of rejuvenate typically doesn't make the difference here. A lot of times that extra 50 rage going from 2 points to 3 doesn't move the needle, because a lot of times you're still capped at your rage cap, and so that extra rage is thrown in the garbage. So 2 points out of 3 here for rejuvenate. Along the way, you grab burning blood. You also grab emergency protection here that says whenever you take skill damage of any type, you have a 50% chance to reduce all incoming skill damage by 15% for 3 seconds. And we have a loose formation, which means you take 9% less skill damage of all types as well. In the cavalry tree, we grab imblation shield to further reduce your skill damage you take by 12%. So between that and loose formation, you're taking 21% less skill damage all the time, and 30% less from the third skill on Saladin, and you have the chance to further reduce that with emergency protection. All in all, you're taking a lot less skill damage with him, which is very, very cool. You also grab Undying Fury off on the left here for extra rage, and you put 3 points into disarm, which will give you a 10% chance to reduce the target's attack by 15% for 2 seconds. Honestly, there's just nowhere else that I would take a point away from in order to get this. Everything else that you could remove from, I think, is better than this. It's only a 2-second debuff, and it's only to 1 target, so that's why to me that belongs at 3 instead of 4. Now, another talent build that you could consider would be something like this, and I'll explain this talent build. It's for basically one single commander pair. I'll talk about that later, but in this case, you do actually go ahead and grab Cage of Thorns. You put 1 point here just to get that debuff. You also come up and grab Halberd at 2 points, everything else on the right and left sides of the tree, and then you put 3 points into Buckler Shield to take less counterattack damage. Now, an alternative to that build is this. If you don't love the Buckler Shield, really, again, Buckler Shield only is good if you're being swarmed down, right? And I'll explain the commander pairing for this build in a moment, but if you don't want the Buckler Shield, then you just put the extra points in this side of the tree here, and you actually grab an extra 6% march speed, which is pretty cool. You don't need it, but it's nice. Again, I'll explain this later, but for most of you, this is going to be the talent build that you go with. Okay, 2 points in rejuvenate, 3 points in disarm, everything else is maxed out. And once you get into Season of Conquest, Saladin does get a museum relic, and it gives him some more things that he didn't really have before. First of all, you get 10% cav march speed and 10% cav attack. Now, he already had 20% attack, so I mean, this is going to make him hit a little bit harder, right? That was one of the downsides of Saladin. He doesn't hit super hard, so okay, now you have a little bit more attack, and remember, he only has 5% march speed. This bumps it up to 15, so he's a little bit faster, puts him on par with commanders such as like Huo, for example, and so that's kind of okay. But here's the thing, he only has a single tier unlocked right now, and that's weird because commanders like Alex, who's also season 2, have 2 relic tiers, and it's also weird because the other early game cav commanders have 2 as well, so just Minamoto and Cao Cao. So I don't know what they're waiting for with putting a second relic on Saladin, but it has to be really good to change the outcome for the end game. And plot twist, I don't think it's possible, right? I just don't think it's possible. The second tier would have to be like 40% attack, and the third tier would have to be like 70% attack or something, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The last thing to go over here is formations, and really I think wedge formation makes the most sense for Saladin. I mean, he's dealing skill damage, and he might be paired with someone who's dealing skill damage, and so that just makes the most sense. He's not so tanky that you would do something like hollow square formation, so yeah, there's really no other great choices here. Okay, so now that we've covered everything on Saladin's kit, what are the pros and cons of Saladin? Let's start with the pros here. First of all, he actually has some nice tanky stats for cavalry, especially in the early game. Like I said, lots of the cavs, they're fast, they hit hard, but they have no tankiness to them at all. They're very squishy, and so this kind of solves that problem for them, especially because of his support tree here, taking less skill damage with loose formation and emergency protection. We really like that a lot. So quite tanky for cavs in the early game. He's also a very good budget build commander. This was historically the reason so many people used him at 5551. The reason for this is because you don't need that fourth skill at all, and the expertise is not very good. I mean, it's fine, but it's not worth the extra 380 legendary commanders or 310 legendary commander sculptures that you need just for this fourth skill alone, right? It takes 380 to get 551 and 310 for that last skill, which is just not worth it. And like, you know, you guys probably know this, but if you're a new player, maybe not, you could just skill lock him at 1, get his first skill to 5, skill lock him at 2, second skill to 5, skill lock him at 3, third skill to 5, and then that's it. You just unlock the fourth skill and you're done, right? You never even have to worry about it. There's no RNG here. You just can guaranteed get the configuration that you want, which is really cool. So he's a great budget build commander. He's one of the tankiest cavs in the early game. He has a unique talent distribution, and I guess one of the pros here, and I do want to mention this, the March speed debuff is useful in some scenarios. We'll talk about that when we discuss commander pairs, but that's kind of where the pros for Saladin end. The cons for Saladin are that he just does not age well, right? His kit was built at a time where single target damage was decent and everyone was dealing skill damage, and that's pretty much it. That's all you needed was, you know, an average skill damage hit with decent stats and mitigating skill damage, and all of a sudden you were meta, especially at a 5551, right? But these days we see lots more types of damage in the open field, and that's even going to be the case for kvk2, right? In the recent face-to-face with the developers, I made a video about that. You can check it out on the channel if you want all the details, but they are introducing smite damage to kvk2 in the form of Chook. They're reworking his entire skill set. If you guys didn't know, definitely go ahead and check out that video because we go in depth with all of that. But he's going to be a infantry versatility and smite commander in kvk2, and like I said earlier in the video, Bert is going to be a cavalry versatility and combo commander for kvk2 as well, so we'll have combo damage as well. And so with all of that being said, the skill damage taken reduction here is even less valuable than it was before, even in kvk2, right? So he's only single target, his damage isn't super high, his debuff isn't anything crazy, it's just march speed and healing reduction, and his tankiness is in question now. It's still good for kvk2, don't get me wrong, you're still mostly going to see skill damage, but it's not as good as it once was. The final con I would say for Saladin is that he is no longer the only decent cavalry commander in kvk2, because prior to this he was, you know, competing with Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan is just horrible, right? His kit is absolute garbage, and so there was never any question. It was just, okay, yeah, always get Saladin if you're gonna run Cavs in kvk2. Now you have Bert, who has a combo damage AoE, and the rest of his kit is solid. Now it's less stats than we see on Saladin, but I mean, there's an argument to be made here that you could invest in Bert. Now I'll talk about this again in a minute, but the skills for Bert have changed for kvk2, so I've updated them here. The second skill is the same, third skill, fourth skill, and expertise. Okay, so the skills are a little different. We'll talk about that in a second, but with that being said, before we talk about the Bertrand, let's talk about who can you pair Saladin with in kvk2, and the answer is, well, you could do some of the things that people have always done with Saladin in kvk2. You could pair him with somebody like Minamoto. If you did the Minamoto primary, then the Saladin secondary, you're making your Minamoto, who already is fast, who already hits hard, who has a nice debuff on the fourth skill. Now it's got some tankiness, right? You've got the tankiness on the defense and on the third skill here, and so this is kind of like a match made in heaven for Cavs, right? Alternatively, if you did the Saladin primary, Minamoto secondary, then now you have an even more tanky pair because of the support tree on Saladin, right? So that's a great commander pairing if you want to go that route. If your Minamoto is paired with somebody else, for example, and you want to run two commander pairs, maybe you could do the Saladin with Cao Cao, assuming you have enough gear for two cavalry marches here, right? Another thing you could do would be Saladin primary with Yi Seong-Gye secondary, right? This is actually a commander pair that a lot of people used to use in kvk2, probably still do, honestly, because Yi Seong-Gye gives you a super powerful 5 target AoE that you put behind a relatively tanky and fast Saladin, right? Saladin has no problem catching up to other commanders on the field as long as they're not Cavs, right? He's definitely slower than the Minamoto pairings, right? But if you're going to catch up to an archer or an infantry commander, you'll have no problem with that with Saladin, and you'll be able to stick to them, pop off your circular AoE with Yi Seong-Gye, and then retreat. Also, on top of that, you also have a nice rage engine here, and the 50% skill damage is going to make Saladin's active skill hit a little bit harder, right? So the fact that Yi Seong-Gye is technically an archer commander doesn't really matter, because the only archer related stats he has as a secondary is this chance for archer attack, which is not that big of a deal, right? So you're actually not really losing anything here by having Yi Seong-Gye be a quote unquote universal secondary commander. So Saladin primary, Yi Seong-Gye secondary, you get, again, best of both worlds, massive AoE damage, and you get the speed and tankiness of Saladin as well, which is quite nice. Another commander pairing that a lot of people used to use in kvk2 would be the Saladin primary with the Ethelfled secondary. Where is she? The reason you would do this is simple. First of all, like I said before, Saladin is a budget build commander, 5551, and he's done. Second of all, Ethelfled is a free-to-play commander, right? You get her for free just by logging in. She also has a 5 target half circle AoE with a really powerful debuff. The damage factor here is very low, even by kvk KVK2 standards, it's not crazy, even though it is 5 targets, which is okay. The other thing is though, she takes 20% less counterattack damage, which you're already taking 20% less with the third skill here on Saladin, so now you're taking even less with the Ethelfled, which is nice. She also has a chance to reduce the enemy's march speed. You're already reducing the march speed with the active skill on Saladin, and her expertise says that you deal 20% more damage to enemies that have been slowed. So this is the commander pair that I was talking about earlier, where if you take a look at the active skill and the talent build for Saladin, you now have a really great way of spreading this slowdown debuff to multiple targets. Cage of Thorns is a 5 target AoE slowdown, which means you're going to be dealing that 20% more extra damage with Ethelfled's expertise to any commander that you're hitting that is affected by Cage of Thorns. And again, not only that, but you're slowing them down crazy. 5 seconds with this active skill. This is going to be up almost all the time, and will certainly be up for Ethelfled's active skill cast on the as a secondary. And again, she has a chance to slow them as well, right? So there's so much slowdown here. Enemies are not going to be able to get away. You're going to be snaring everything. It's going to be like quicksand. They're going to be trying to run away they can, right? Now the downside is you're really not super strong, but there's a lot of utility here on this build to slow things down, to debuff them with Ethelfled, to deal extra damage to them. And so it's a nice budget build use case for Saladin. But let's jump back to the Bertrand here, because maybe there's an opportunity here to pair your Bertrand with Saladin, right? We have a 2 combo attack, 3 target rectangular AoE. So 2 combo attacks for 600 damage factor is 1200 damage factor, and a rage debuff to these targets, which is pretty cool. Second skill gives you 10% attack, 10% health, 10% march speed outside of territory, and 5% less damage taken. Third skill, when you're outside of territory, you also deal 10% more normal damage, and whenever you launch a base attack, there's a 25% chance to launch a combo attack with a damage factor of 400. Long cooldown there, 10 seconds. Fourth skill says when you deal combo damage, you have a 40% chance to increase the rage requirement of the target and give them 20 rage if they've already been affected by that. Expertise says you take 5% less damage, so combine that with this, that's 10% less damage and 10% more combo damage to troops with less than 60%. Okay, so that's Bertrand's updated kit, and you can easily make the case that you would do something like a Saladin primary with Bertrand secondary, right? The reason for that is that Bertrand would have the combo tree, and combos don't really benefit Saladin at all. He deals skill damage, right? However, the support tree does benefit both commanders because it gives you a nice rage engine, and it gives you some tankiness here as well, right? So I would rather have the Saladin primary, most likely, if you're going to do this pairing. But all in all, I don't see why this wouldn't be a great option, right? You've already got some tankiness on Saladin. Now you're taking 5% less all damage, or in the case of being expertise outside of territory, it's 10% less all damage, and you get 10% health. I mean, all in all, and he's giving you some march speed that you definitely want on the Saladin, right? So all in all, I feel like this is a very tanky build, probably the most tanky that you could get in KVK2 for cavalry, and it gives Saladin a little bit of an AoE and a debuff on that AoE, which is quite nice. So all in all, I actually really like this commander pairing here, but the downside is that both Saladin and Bertrand are only available in KVK2, right? And so you'd have to like go into KVK2 with the expectation that you're going to dump a bunch of heads into both these commanders all at the same time. It's going to be really hard to save up enough sculptures to do that, and you would have to kind of not invest in anything for KVK1 if that's the case. So to me, this feels kind of like a whale pairing. Honestly, it kind of does. The other thing to remember though is that, you know, a lot of people still use Minamoto because he's actually quite good in KVK2. And the thing with Bertrand is, you know, he has the combo attacks which have a chance to trigger attacks that proc off of basic attacks, and the fourth skill here on Minamoto says you have a 10% chance to increase the target's damage received by 30% when you launch a basic attack, right? And so this will actually proc a little bit more often if you pair Minamoto and Bertrand together, because the active skill on Bertrand or the instant proc combos will have a chance to trigger this, right? Which is actually quite good. Now another commander pairing that might be better with Bertrand, and maybe I'm like losing my mind here, maybe I'm just super tired, I'm not thinking about this properly, but what if you did a Frederick primary Bertrand secondary? And hear me out here, right? Because Frederick buffs himself, and then every basic attack has a 100% chance to deal 800 damage factor. Now that's only when he's expertise, it's 80% otherwise, but you know, you pop this buff, right? And then your secondary is Bertrand, and he does a 3 target combo AoE. Well, those combo attacks can trigger things that are triggered by basic attacks. So I mean, maybe I'm not thinking about this properly, but in theory, wouldn't that combo attack active skill from Bertrand make Frederick's active skill a 3 target AoE, right? Like you're hitting 3 targets with your combo attacks, and those combo attacks can trigger basic attacks, and this has a 100% chance of triggering on a basic attack, and it would still be within the buff window, right? So I mean, am I crazy here? Is this now an 800 damage factor AoE? The downside of that obviously is you have to run Frederick primary, and the skill tree has no synergy with Bertrand either. So really you have two talent trees. Like the talent trees are atrocious for this, right? But I'm just curious to know if there's enough damage factor there to go around. Plus you have the extra unit capacity and some healing here as well. Like I wonder if there's so much damage output on the active skill that it might be worth it. Who knows there, right? But my point is that even though the Saladin Bertrand combo is probably the best tanky combo for Cavs in KVK2, it looks like a well pairing, and there's other places that you might want to put that Bertrand. So you know, that's something to definitely consider. So then the question becomes, should you even invest in Saladin at all? And the answer is, it kind of depends, but probably not, right? Probably not. And the reason that I say that is because first of all, like I said, he now competes with Bertrand, and Bertrand has an AoE and he has a debuff, and yes, he has less stats, he's a little bit less tanky, but you might be dealing more damage there, and who knows how he's going to pair well with Minamoto. We'll have to wait and see when he comes into the game, right? But also Saladin does not age well. He does not age into the end game, right? And so, you know, even in a world where you could say, okay, I prefer Saladin over Bertrand, that might be the case, right? Maybe you do prefer that, and that's fine. Even in that scenario, he's not going to work in Season of Conquest, right? He's just not, there's no way to really make that work. So the only players that I think should be investing in Saladin today in KVK2 are players who plan on using him for the commander swap event. Now I've covered this on the channel before, so if you've missed previous videos, definitely check those out. But that at the end of KVK2, you get an event that comes around called the commander swap event, and you can swap up to 2 legendary commanders for 2 Season of Conquest endgame commanders, and one of those commanders is King Arthur, right? And this would be the go-to, right? You would just take your Saladin, whatever you have invested in him, 5551 or whatever, and you just swap him for King Arthur, and there you go. Now your Saladin investment makes sense in the end game, and you put Saladin back on the bench, and he's pretty much just going to sit there forever, and that's just how it is. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you guys. So really, again, I want to be very clear here. If you're going to invest in Saladin in KVK2, just know that 1, he's still good in KVK2, he just has a little bit of competition here, and 2, you definitely should not keep him into Season of Conquest because he's not going to perform really well there, right? Unless his next relic is something so insane that we've never seen it before, he's just not going to compete in like Season of Conquest. He's just not outputting enough damage. It just is what it is, right? The other thing, the only other use for Saladin would be, you know, in the end game, if you can use him for support skills, bastion skills, auxiliary skills, or whatever, depending on your KVK, right? Some KVKs let you use skills from older commanders on your newer commanders, and that really helps out these, you know, commanders like Saladin a lot, because then at least you get a little bit of value there, right? In, you know, KVKs where this is a support skill, well, I now have 40% more stats for my cav march, and more march speed is great, right? It's really, really good. So that's the only like saving grace for Saladin in the end game, is that some KVKs let you use these skills on other commanders. But all in all, if you do invest in Saladin for KVK2, I think he will perform really well still in 2025, but you should be swapping him away for King Arthur or somebody else in his caliber later down the line, right? So that's pretty much it, guys. That is kind of my updated guide for Saladin in 2025. Unfortunately, the updated guide for Alexander the Great was all sort of good news, where, you know, he's good in KVK2. If you keep him for Season of Conquest, he's still decent, and you can swap him if you don't want him. Whereas for Saladin, it's like, yes, he's still pretty good, but now he has a little bit of competition, and he's not good in the end game, so you have to swap him, right? So he's just not quite as good as he used to be in Rise of Kingdoms, even in KVK2, which is pretty unfortunate. But guys, let me know what you think about Saladin in the comment section below. Do you still think that he is a great budget build? Let me know down there, and while you're down there, make sure you drop a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel a ton, more now than ever. Liking a video really helps out the creators that you like to watch the most, so please consider dropping a thumbs up. It takes 1 second, and subscribe down below if you haven't already. Click the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. And with that being said, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.